Hey friend, this is the Traveling Wellnesspreneur podcast, and I'm your host, Allie Temple. I travel full-time, running my dream wellness biz from the tropics, and I want to share with you how you can create a lifestyle of freedom and purpose too. Stay tuned for inspiring and fun conversations that will empower you to take action towards your dream lifestyle of travel and freedom. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Traveling Wellnesspreneur podcast, my travel-loving entrepreneurs. You might have heard an episode that I shared recently with digital nomad tax specialist Marcella Georgieva. And if you didn't catch that one, I'll link it to the show notes in case you haven't heard it. Check it out. But since then, I've been hearing from some of you who do want to learn where to start with your taxes when it comes to being a traveling entrepreneur or an expat, but you are American. And as you might know, taxes can be a little more complicated for our friends in the US. And so that is why today I'm sharing a recent conversation with Grace Taylor. And Grace actually specializes in US tax consulting for American expats and digital nomads. She's got some great wisdom to share with us, and she's also going to talk about her experience being an expat and a nomad as well. Really interesting, sharing a little bit about her time in South Africa and also in Portugal and other places. So before we get to Grace's conversation and her bio, I wanted to firstly share that if you missed out on the Location Liberation Program for traveling entrepreneurs, that live launch that we did earlier this year, I wanted to let you know that the self-paced program is now available. For a very limited time, you can actually receive an incredible savings to score unlimited lifetime access to this program. So if you missed out on the live program or you just want to learn more about what this awesome program is all about, I'm going to share the link along with a special limited time promo code in the show notes. Be sure to check that out if you're an entrepreneur who wants to learn all of the details on how to travel sustainably, take care of your health, and do it the right way, and learn all of the ins and outs around visas and packing and booking travel and accommodations and where to go and all that good stuff. So check that out, and let's dive into Grace's bio. Grace Taylor is the founder of Gracefully Expat, a U.S. tax consulting and compliance practice focusing on American expats and digital nomads. Grace has been working in the specialty of U.S. expat tax for her entire career, first with KPMG and then with her current practice. She is also a digital nomad herself, currently based in Portugal. Here's my conversation with Grace. Welcome, Grace. It's so nice to have you here joining us. Let's start out by just sharing with us, where are you joining us from and how long have you been there for?
Well, thank you so much, Ali. It's a pleasure to be here. I am in beautiful Vancouver, Canada, which is actually where I'm originally from. And I've been here for just over a week now.
I'm actually from Vancouver as well originally, and I know that feeling.
I don't think I knew that about you.
Last I was living in Vancouver was about, I think, 8 years ago. I was in the city, so it's been a while, but
Yep.
It's always nice to go home.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a nice time of year to be here.
Definitely. I always try to aim my visits to summertime as well. So I'd love to just take a step back and hear a little bit from you about when you left Vancouver, where did you start traveling and why did you start?
Yeah, well, that it kind of leads into how it happens that a Canadian happens to be a U.S. tax professional by trade. So I actually left Vancouver when I was still at university. I transferred down to University of Washington. I graduated from there. I ended up getting a job at a Big Four accounting firm there, and actually that's where I started to specialize in U.S. Tax, specifically for expats. I was working on a big corporate client and handling their individual, executives as they were being transferred overseas. Primarily was that client engagement. So I worked there for a while. It kind of felt more or less like home because Seattle to Vancouver, there's a lot of similarities. So I felt like my first real expat experience was when first I took a short-term rotation to South Africa, which was really eye-opening, and I enjoyed it so much. I came back to Seattle for a bit, and then I took a long-term, like a permanent transfer to Ireland. And I was based in Ireland for a few years, loved it there, but was just working the traditional job. This kind of leads into the origin story of how I started my business too. At some point I realized, and this was well before COVID, but I realized, well, I'm doing my job entirely online. But the company was giving me a little bit of pushback on the time that I wanted to spend back home in Vancouver. And it was difficult balancing. I wanted to explore so much of Europe, but I also wanted to spend time with my family back here too. And there just wasn't enough PTO days for it, basically. So I thought, you know what, forget this. Let me start my own business. I was connected with so many expats around Ireland at the time, anyways. And I realized, there's actually a need for someone who knows this specialty and who can provide it directly to individuals, particularly individuals who don't work for a big company that covers their tax services for them. So I thought, well, maybe there's a space for me to work with people directly, people who are pretty much like me, who want to travel the world, who want to be location independent. So yeah, that's kind of what I did. And so then I quit my job in 2017, started my business, started pretty much traveling very nomadically up until COVID. Then I've kind of bounced around ever since then.
That's so cool. So you saw a need and a lifestyle that you were interested in, and you just went for it. And I love those stories because I think so many people see that vision, that dream that they have, and they get stuck in the taking action part. So it's great to hear that you went for it and it's been working out. So since that time around 2017, have you been primarily in Europe, or where have you been spending a lot of your time?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a mix. Pre-COVID, it was kind of all over the shop, a lot of Europe, a lot of Asia. Then COVID, I ended up back in Vancouver for about 9 months, which was the longest I've been back here since I was at university. And then after that, I started traveling again, mostly Europe. Now I spend a lot of time in Africa. I spend time in South Africa and Namibia primarily. My
Mm,
boyfriend's Namibian, so he has family there.
okay.
So it's actually also a beautiful place that I think is kind of just off the nomad radar for now, but I think it'll be more on the radar soon. It's a really nice place to visit.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about Namibia? What do you love about it, especially for those who are traveling entrepreneurs and expats who are working remotely?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really happy to talk about that. And I feel like I've kind of somehow inadvertently become kind of the Namibia, not expert, but sort of go-to resource for some of my friends.
Uh,
Because it's a small country and people just oftentimes haven't even heard of it. But if you're going down to spend time in, for example, Cape Town, which is an awesome nomad hub, and there's a ton of like infrastructure there for nomads already, it's a very
mhm.
short flight up to Namibia. It's the next country to the north. It's safe. There's reliable internet. It's kind of everything you need to be productive, and then also has amazing access to this like landscape and scenery that I had never seen before. It's very dramatic, desert, dunes, beautiful coastline, lots of things to do outdoors, access to nature. So I think it's a really cool place, and it's also very like it's chilled and relaxed. And people who haven't spent a ton of time in Africa yet, I feel like it's a good like entry point because
Mhm.
it's quite comfortable.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard much at all about Namibia, and I have not been to Africa yet, but I've heard some really amazing things. So that's great to know. When you started your practice and you had already been working for Americans, you were in Seattle, and so you chose to continue that. Was that because of the work prior that you had been doing with Americans? Why did you decide to focus your practice on American expats?
Primarily because that was what I already knew. That's what I had, spent all those years at the Big Four firm training in and specializing in. And actually, even the time that I was at the Irish firm, I was still doing US tax for them. They didn't have a ton of volume for US tax, which is part of the reason I was also motivated to start my practice, because I was kind of feeling like I was going to have to retrain for Irish tax, which I wasn't very interested in doing.
Ooh.
Um, so yeah, I felt like I have built up this body of knowledge and expertise. And actually, maybe it's interesting enough for your audience as well, who I think are also creators and entrepreneurs. um, when I knew I wanted to quit, I actually wasn't sure I wanted to keep doing tax. I just wanted more freedom. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll do a travel blog or something. And I kind of half tried that, but my heart really wasn't in it. And if I'm honest, it's not where I could offer the most value to people. And I realized
Mhm.
what I could offer the most value in is what I had been working at for, almost 10 years at that point. So that was
Yeah.
kind of what I ended up doing. And I'm glad that I did because, it's tax is not the most glamorous thing in the world, but it's really rewarding being able to help people kind of cut through confusion and kind of tackle something that sometimes people find very overwhelming.
Definitely. I'm one of those people. It's so great to hear that you kind of tried something different and then you realize, like, this is what I'm good at. This is what I can share with the world, but I can do it in a way that still offers me the freedom to live my life the way that I want. And so you created this business, this practice with the lifestyle that you wanted, and so that you could have that balance that I think so many of us are searching for now. And I know so many of our listeners are craving that balance and that freedom as well. I'm curious now, if we think about the American tax system, I know a lot of my listeners are Americans. I don't know much about it, but I did work in the US actually for 4 years. I had a work visa in Los Angeles, but I know that the American tax system is complex. And I'm wondering if you can share with us today, for those who are American expats or thinking about becoming expats from America, a few of the issues that you're seeing with your clients when they come to you looking for help.
Absolutely. So the first thing to point out, especially when speaking to a diverse and a mixed audience, is I always like to point out that the U.S. system, the tax system, is extremely unique and is unlike most other systems in most other, shall we say, developed countries. Because, for example, in Canada, after I no longer lived here and I completely had no residential ties, no Canadian source income, nothing linking me back to Canada whatsoever. I simply don't file a tax return in Canada anymore. That's the end of the story. I file a tax return sometimes in the country that I'm in a resident of. Right now, I'm a resident of Portugal, for example, so I file there. But my citizenship doesn't link me back to always filing taxes in my home country. Americans, that's not the case. And so that's what makes it very, very different when we're talking about tax issues for location independent, globally mobile people. Is, Canadians, Europeans, Australians to an extent are oftentimes able to break their tax residency in their origin country, their passport country. And then they look at what other countries am I tax resident in? What other obligations do I have around the world, if any? For Americans, however, no matter where they go, no matter how long, maybe you're a long-term permanent expat, you've moved to France and now you've lived there for the last 25 years, you're still going to file a US tax return each and every year that you have any income from any worldwide sources. So that's the biggest difference right off the bat. And if I can say, the level one sort of issue that people sometimes have is they simply don't know that. And what oftentimes people do is they just assume that I haven't lived in the US for a while, I don't have any US source income, I don't have to file anything. And sometimes people can go years and not have filed anything, and that can be a problem. So number one is know that you actually do have a filing obligation, linked to simply being a US citizen, and it is required to report 100% of worldwide income, no matter where you're living or working around the world. When I'm talking to my European friends or my Canadian friends, there's always this question of, well, where should I be tax resident? Where can I be tax resident? What are the pros and cons of that? But for Americans, nomads, especially international nomads, they kind of don't have to worry about that, so to speak. They can just keep filing their U.S. tax returns, knowing that they're fully compliant. You can look at it as a kind of something to simplify, something to take off of your decision list, because that can be a real analysis paralysis for nomads from other countries. But where it gets oftentimes complicated is when a person, just by virtue of their lifestyle or where they're spending their time, is a tax resident of another country, but then they also have to report that same income in the US. Then there are mechanisms by which foreign tax credits or treaties, that there shouldn't be double taxation on that income, but the reporting of it can be complex, and then it can require, a professional to assist you. Oftentimes someone will come to me and they'll say, you know what, I just realized I needed to file and I haven't been filing. And then we talk about it, we make a plan. There are various amnesty programs that can sometimes be applicable for people. Under some of those programs, you can kind of get caught up, file for a few years in one go, and then you're kind of with a clean slate again. So we look at if people are eligible for those programs, we get them caught up, we do whatever they need to do, and then oftentimes they become long-term clients of mine as well, and then I just help them on an annual basis.
Okay. And can you share a little bit more about the amnesty programs and what that is in case anyone isn't sure?
It's probably a longer conversation than we have time for, but just to plant it in people's minds is if you are primarily living and working outside the US and you're behind on your taxes, first of all, don't panic. There's always a way forward. But it's usually best to work with a professional for that. Unfortunately, professionals are not free or even always cheap, but I think it's worth it because I've seen people, for example, go on Facebook groups, give each other really terrible advice and get themselves into even worse problems. So that being said, there is a program for people who are primarily living and working outside the US, particularly if they have unreported foreign assets like foreign bank accounts. Then we can look at, are they eligible for something called the streamlined filing compliance procedures. And under that program, various eligibility criteria do apply, such as the failure to file has to be non-willful. It means that there was no intent to, evade taxes. And for most people, to be honest, that is the case. Everyone that I've ever worked with has been just genuinely unaware. And if that is the case, then oftentimes we can look at eligibility for that program. Under that program, what you do is you file 3 years of back tax returns. And if you have foreign bank accounts that are subject to reporting, you file 6 years of the bank account reporting forms, which is called FBARs, if people have heard that acronym before. And then it oftentimes allows people to do that catch up and do it without being subject to any failure to file penalties. So that can be a very good one.
Okay. Okay.
And
Yeah, that's good
it's
to
a
know.
little less overwhelming especially if you. So sometimes I deal with people who file under that program who have been living outside the US for 10, 15, 20 years. And then it's
Mm.
extremely overwhelming to think, how am I going to get those records? It's much more manageable if we can focus it on notes, just those 3 years, the last 3 years.
That's interesting. So now, are there any suggestions you can give to American expats, those who are considering this nomadic lifestyle, to kind of just help them wrap their heads around the whole tax situation?
Absolutely. So as I said, step one is be aware that you have to file. And then step
Hmm.
two is understand all the moving parts that go with that. For example, I would say I would just even mentally, I kind of divide my clients into two camps. One is what I consider as more of like a long-term expat, which means they probably are permanently based in another country. They usually have a residency visa there. Oftentimes they might even be, married to someone from that country. They have a house and kids and a business there. And so they're permanently based in one foreign country. And, in almost every case, they're obligated to file a tax return in that country. So then what we're looking at is making sure that everything is reported correctly on both sides. Obviously, I don't do any compliance work for any country besides the US. So, they would need a French or a German or an Australian tax professional to help them with that piece. But then I can help them report everything correctly on the US side, making sure that everything that is eligible for example, foreign tax credit is done properly. So that's that piece. But I think probably more of your audience will fall into what is actually, I think, the majority of my client base as well, is what we would call nomads. And those individuals may or may not have a residency or right to live and work in any other country, and oftentimes are just moving around the world on tourist visas. But they no longer have a main home base in the US. They come back there to visit family and friends a couple times a year, but that's really not where they're spending the majority of their time. And for those individuals, it can be quite interesting because they, just by virtue of how frequently they travel, they're probably not subject to tax in any of the countries that they spend time in, a few months there on a tourist visa. But they are eligible for a pretty significant potential tax advantage, which is something called the foreign earned income exclusion. If I can say in one word, that's probably the number one reason why most people contact me. They either contact me to catch up because they are out of compliance and they didn't know it, or they contact me because they know about this thing called the foreign earned income exclusion, and they want to make sure that they do it right and that they do it to the best advantage.
Yeah.
But basically, what it is it's a way for Americans who spend the majority of their time outside the US. They're able to claim a maximum amount of earned income. So it has to be income from working. It can't be passive income like rental property or investments or cryptocurrency. It's really, your either your W-2 job or your self-employment activity, and it's earned while you are physically outside the US. So, it's attributed to that time that you're spent, sitting at a cafe in Thailand. That's eligible for the foreign earned income exclusion. And it means that you can exclude up to a maximum amount per year from ordinary income tax. So that is adjusted for inflation each year. So right now it's about 126,000, quite a lot. The eligibility for it, though, for most nomads is under something called the physical presence test. It's a quite strict counting days test. So you have to be physically outside the US for at least 330 days in a 12-month period. Some people who are back and forth from the US a lot, unfortunately, they're just not going to be able to qualify for it. And then some people, they only come back for a couple of weeks at Thanksgiving or Christmas, and then it's, not a problem for them. There is another test to be eligible for it called the bona fide resident test. But that test more often would apply to, again, what I consider as the traditional expats, because it does require that you have a legal right to live and work in another country. Sometimes I have clients actually who, after several years of being very nomadic, they eventually do get a residency somewhere else, like, for example, Mexico. It's pretty straightforward, as I understand, to get like a residency permit there. And then under that, they can start claiming the bona fide resident test, and it can be a little more flexible in terms of their travel back home.
That's so interesting. Okay. So yeah, they need to be out of the country basically except for one short visit home for a couple
More
of
or
weeks.
less.
Yeah.
There's more to it than that. So that's just a little teaser for people
Yeah.
to be aware that such a thing exists. And if you think you
Yeah.
might be eligible for it, I'd really suggest seeking out a professional, or, at least doing a little more research online to see if you're eligible.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, how can our listeners find you and work with you?
I have a website. I think you're going to link to that. I have a online scheduling tool where people can schedule a consultation with me if they would like to. They're not free because otherwise I would do nothing else besides free consultations. And if people aren't sure if they are the right fit or the right candidate for a paid consultation, they're very welcome to email me. I'm very open to answering emails.
So we'll share all of those links down in the show notes. And I want to thank you so much, Grace, for joining us. Before we take off, I would love to hear from you. You said that you are spending a good amount of time in Portugal. That is on my list. I haven't been there yet. I'm curious, how much time have you spent there, and what is it that you're enjoying about Portugal?
I love that question because it's Portugal is such an awesome country. So yeah, actually, my partner and I, we just got our Portugal residency late last year.
Oh, nice.
So
Okay.
that's kind of home base now. And under the residency, you're supposed to spend at least 6 months a year, but we probably are going to end up spending more than that. So before we got back to Vancouver, we were there for about 4 or 5 months. It's an awesome country. It's fairly affordable, although I would say the prices are kind of going up like everywhere. But it's beautiful. I love having a base in Europe again because it's so easy to travel to the rest of the nearby amazing places as well.
Yeah.
Portuguese people are just really nice. We just enjoy it there. They're very laid back. They're very polite, friendly. So yeah, we kind of felt at home right away, and I love it as a base to just be really productive from, because there's access to the outdoors, great food, healthy food, and then you can just, get work done and really enjoy a work-life balance.
That sounds beautiful. Definitely towards the top of my list, but I'm in Bali now for the next year or so, and just
Oh,
making the
wow.
most out of that Southeast Asian lifestyle. And thank you so much, Grace, again for sharing your time and your wisdom with us. Everyone check out the show notes to connect with Grace, especially those American expats out there or wannabes. Grace, we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Ali. It was a pleasure.
That's it for now. Thanks so much for joining me, and until next time, let's stay connected. Follow me on Instagram at Ali Temple Yoga. Join us in the Traveling Wellnesspreneurs Facebook group, And if you enjoyed this episode, please take a minute to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. See you next time.